Hey there, micro folks. It's Mr. Hooker again. Today we are in chapter 6 talking about elasticity, which is a relatively interesting thing. Well, I'm a micro guy, so a lot of this is interesting to me. Hopefully, it's interesting to you too. This is going to be video one of at least two, possibly three. I'll know more at the end of this video. So here we go. Let's get into this. So let's see if we can do that. Yeah, there we go. So price elasticity of demand. There's going to be at least four elasticities. I think there's five elasticities here. But this is the first one and the big one. Price elasticity of demand. And we'll denote this one as E sub D. It measures buyers' responsiveness to price changes. So how responsive you are to a change in price. And you got three different elasticities. There's elastic demand, inelastic demand, and unit elastic demand. So elastic demand means that we as consumers are sensitive to price changes, and so a small change in price leads to a large change in quantity demanded. Inelastic demand means that we as consumers are insensitive to price changes, and so a large change in price leads to a small change in quantity demanded. So that's basically the way those two work. They're pretty simple. Elastic goods, you can look at luxury goods or elastic goods, those things that are not necessities. Those things are always elastic goods. So that's the way that goes. Inelastic goods, oil, gas, necessities are inelastic goods. So and vice goods. So your cigarettes, your alcohol, those things are always inelastic goods. That's why the taxes on those are so crazy high. So price elasticity coefficient. So the way you do that, E sub D is equal to the percentage change in quantity demanded of good X divided by the percentage change in price of good X. A couple of different ways to do this, and we'll get into that. But what this does is measures your. Why did it go back? It went backwards. I don't know why. All right, so we're going to use the midpoint formula, which that will ensure a consistent result. So in macro, we always just used a simple percentage change formula, which was year two minus year one, divide by year one. That's not going to work for this because if you do that on this, it's going to be kind of weird. You could, if two people, you had 2 points, A and B. If somebody chooses A as one and somebody else chooses B as one, you could get two different results. So we always want the same result regardless of whether you choose A as one or B as one. And so we're going to use a midpoint formula. So the way that goes is they're going to do change in quantity divided by sum of quantities divided by 2, divided by the change in price divided by the sum of prices divided by 2. Simply put, it looks like this. Q1 minus Q2 divided by Q1 plus Q2 divided by 2 divided by P1 minus P2 divided by P1 plus P2 divided by 2. And it sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. It's kind of easy to do, but that's a formula you need to know. Just pointing that out right now. So we're always going to use percentages in unit-free measure, so don't worry about units. And you're going to it makes it easy to compare elasticities across products. The key thing is, if we go back here, just to go here, change in quantity demanded and change in price, so they're going to move in opposite directions, right? If price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. If price goes down, quantity demanded goes up, correct? So there's always going to be, it's always going to be a negative number. We are going to convert that into a positive number. We're going to basically make that a negative thing, a positive thing. So eliminate the minus sign because it just makes it easier to compare those elasticities because we want them to be some kind of whole number. We don't want it to be a negative thing. So here's why we do that. Here's your interpretation. if your elasticity of demand is a number greater than 1, and this is after you eliminate that negative sign, if it's a number greater than 1, then it is elastic. If it is exactly equal to 1 is what we call unit elastic, and that is if you're a firm, you do not want to have a unit elastic good. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. And if it is a number less than 1, so between 1 and 0, it is inelastic. And then the closer to 0 it is, the more inelastic it is. The closer to 1 it is, the less inelastic it is. And then the further away from 1 it is, the more elastic it is. So if you've got a number like 4 or 5, it is highly elastic. If it's 1.2, matter of fact, anything on the unit elastic, there really isn't anything that's exactly 1. So we call anything that's 0.8 to 1.2 relatively unit elastic. So your extreme cases, if it's exactly 0, it's perfectly inelastic. If it's infinity, it's perfectly elastic. So how do those draw? Perfectly inelastic demand looks like a vertical line. And it's easy to remember because you can cap that off with that. Make that look like a capital I and then write the word inelastic there. And yay, works for that. And then for perfectly elastic demand, you have a horizontal line. And you can actually remember that by capping that off with that. And then writing the word elastic there. So it makes that look like a capital E. And you have elastic. So how do you figure this out? We can do the total revenue test. So total revenue is price times quantity sold. And for an inelastic demand, price and total revenue move in the same direction. Basically because people are still going to buy goods that are inelastic. They just don't buy less of them. They buy more or buy the same amount. And then elastic, they're going to move in opposite direction because the price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. So price and total revenue move in opposite directions there. So how does that work for an inelastic good, or elastic good, excuse me? If we lower the price, quantity demanded goes up by so much that, oops, I hit a button that I shouldn't have hit there, that your blue gain exceeds your yellow loss. The loss from the quantity is not so much, but the gain that you get, that loss there from that price, is not so much, but the gain in the quantity is way more. So you get more in revenue by lowering your price. And here in an inelastic one, if you lower your price, the loss that you get by lowering the price is greater. That yellow loss exceeds the blue gain, the gain you get from the quantity. So it's a bad idea to lower your price if you have an inelastic good. Okay? And if you have a unit elastic good, if you lower your price, the loss that you get from the price is going to exactly equal the gain you get from the quantity. You cannot change your revenue. And that's why you don't want to have, if you're a firm, you don't want to have a unit elastic good. You will never be able to change your revenue. So if you have a unit elastic good, and you're a firm, and you know that you have a unit elastic good, what you want to do is convince people that you either have an inelastic good or an elastic good. And if you're a firm, you really want to convince them that you have an inelastic good so that you can raise the price and create more revenue. That's what you would like to do. So this is the way this looks. There are 3 segments on a downward sloping demand curve. The top portion is always going to be the elastic portion. The middle portion, it's basically straight out from 0, is unit elastic, and then the bottom portion is inelastic. That becomes important later when we get to the market structure, so please remember that. All right, and so total revenue is basically going to go up, peak, and then come down. So the first part is always going to be the elastic portion. Then you have the unit elastic portion at the peak, and then the inelastic portion as it's going down. So that's the way that's going to look. So if the absolute value of the elasticity of demand is greater than one, demand's elastic or relatively elastic. Its quantity demanded changes by more than price. Um, Total revenue, price goes up, total revenue goes down. Price goes down, total revenue goes up. If it's equal to one, it's units elastic. Total revenue is never going to change. And if it's less than one, it's inelastic or relatively inelastic. So quantity demanded changes by smaller percentage than does price. And if price goes up, total revenue goes up. If price goes down, total revenue goes down. All right. So substitutability. Um, the more substitutes that are available, demand is more elastic. If you can just find something else very easily, then the good is elastic, because if the price goes up, you'll just say, oh, well, I have something else I can buy. I don't need that. The higher proportion of income, the demand is more elastic. So you really don't deal with that. Um, you don't like things that are higher proportion of income. You'll just wait on those. Like cars. So you'll drive a clunker for a long time rather than buy a new one, or you'll just buy a new to you car. So that's how that goes, just because it costs so much. And so on that also, proportion of income. If for those of you that remember that bubblegum double bubble, right? Little pink, blue, and yellow um, wrapper, give you diabetic shock when you bite into it, and then about 5 minutes later, it tastes like cardboard. So if you remember that, I don't know what the lowest price you remember. I'm old. I remember it for a penny. I mean, now it's like 25 cents, but it's a smaller piece than when I used to buy it. But if you see it, and you might get nostalgic for a little double bubble, it's still only a quarter, which is a very low percentage of a low proportion of your income. So it's not very elastic. It's kind of inelastic at that point. So you're not going to spend, you'd be willing to spend a quarter, maybe, maybe if you had if you really felt nostalgic, you might spend a quarter for it. You might not. It's one of those things. Depending on how you felt that day, you may feel that way, you may not. So it's not one of those things where it's a high portion of income, so you might do it. Luxuries versus necessities. Luxury goods demands more elastic. The federal government here in the U.S. decided to put a tax on a lot of luxury goods a number of years ago, and that backfired massively. The idea was we're going to soak it to the rich, but they put taxes on like fur coats, yachts, and a lot of things like that. What happened was the rich people were like, yeah, we don't really need those things. We just won't buy them. And so the tax was actually absorbed by the people who made those goods, and they finally just rescinded the tax just a couple of years ago. The more time available, the more elastic it is, because people will just adjust. So if you have time to adjust to something, you would adjust. So the idea of if gas prices go up and you have time to adjust to that, you'll just buy a more fuel efficient vehicle, etc. But if gas prices go up for a supply shock or something, and all of a sudden it's $4 tomorrow, and you need to get to work, then you don't have time to buy a more fuel efficient car. You're just stuck by paying $4 for gas. So, selected price elasticities of demand. This one is by the McGraw-Hill people. I dispute a number of these because I just don't see them being realistic. The first one is that first one on the left. Newspapers, they have as highly inelastic at 0.1. I just don't know that people buy that many newspapers. They have those as highly inelastic and highly necessary. Electricity for households at 0.13. Bread at 0.15. Major League Baseball tickets at 0.23. Baseball is a failing sport, so I don't know that those are 0.23. I mean, granted, most tickets are bought by businesses, not individuals, so that may be why, but that's a flaw in the program. That's a flaw in the system, not really that kind of thing. Cigarettes at 0.25, that's all right. Telephone service at 0.26. If that's landline telephone service, there's a problem. If that's overall, that might be okay. Sugar 0.3, medical care 0.31. That needs to be better defined. Eggs 0.32, legal services 0.37. Automobile repair 0.4, clothing at 0.49. Gasoline at 0.58. That's kind of high for gasoline, but okay. Milk at 0.63. That's kind of high for milk, by the way. That should be actually a lower number. And I've got another slide for this. That's why I say that. I have a slide for a group of people I trust more. Household appliances at 0.63. Liquor at 0.7. That's extremely high for liquor. Just going to say. Movies 0.87. Beer 0.9. That's extremely high for beer. Shoes at 0.91. Motor vehicles at 1.14. That's a little high for those also. Beef at 1.27. China glassware and tableware at 1.54. I don't have anything to explain on that one. Okay. And so on. So here's another one I have, and this came from a Pearson book I used to use. This one I trust a little bit more. These guys were behavioral economists, and so I trust them a little bit more than uh, the McGraw-Hill text. Your authors are more macro guys, not micro guys. So books from Barnes and Noble. So think of that as you go into the bookstore. That's highly elastic. Books from Amazon 0.6. That's more like ebooks. That's highly that's not highly inelastic, but it's more inelastic. DVDs from Amazon 3.1, so that's highly elastic. Post Raisin Bran is 2.5. I'll explain that in a second. The idea there is it's a single brand. I'll just explain it now. It's a single brand. So the more narrowly defined a good is, the more elastic it is. So it's like saying Post Raisin Bran versus breakfast cereals versus breakfast. So if you say you could only eat Post Raisin Bran, that's one thing. If you said you could only eat breakfast cereals for breakfast, that's another thing. If you said you could eat breakfast or not eat breakfast, that's basically going to be inelastic. So it's, and then if you said you could eat food or not eat food, that is highly, highly inelastic. Okay, so the more generally defined something is, the more inelastic it gets. Automobiles 0.195 or 1.95. Tide liquid detergent, once again, it's narrowly defined, so 3.92. Coca-Cola 1.22. People are brand loyal on that one. That's why it being narrowly defined doesn't matter. Grapes 1.18. Now restaurant meals 0.67. We are a lazy society. We will eat out more than you want to know. So that's why that one's probably more realistic. Health insurance for low-income households, that's why I said the other one was poorly defined, is 0.65. Bread at 0.4. Water for residential use at 0.38. Chicken at 0.37. Cocaine at 0.28. Cigarettes at 0.25. Beer at 0.29. That other one had beer at 0.9, which is insane when you think about that. Catholic school attendance at 0.19. Residential natural gas at 0.09, gas at 0.06, and milk at 0.04. And remember, they had milk at like 0.5 something, and sugar at 0.04. So yeah, this is a better one in my opinion than the other. So some applications here, and for this, you have large crop yields, inelastic demand. If they have an inelastic demand, so you get lower total revenue. And farmers are really productive. They think they need to produce more to make more money. But when they do that, they actually make less money. So that's one of those things. And so excise taxes, these basically, for a lot of times, you get the sin taxes, the taxes on alcohol, the taxes on cigarettes, and those kinds of things, lottery tax, etc. Those, you have inelastic demand, so you get more total revenue. And the decriminalization of illegal drugs, it's an inelastic demand, so you get more total revenue off of that. You can look to Colorado, Washington, Illinois now, a number of states that have decriminalized it. Some are having problems, some are doing better. So price elasticity of supply, I'm going to do that in a separate video. Price elasticity of supply and all the other price elasticities we're going to do in the second video. And I think we'll be down to 2 videos. So thank you. We'll talk to you in the next video.